easy enough to introduce Elizabeth Farnsworth by citing all of her accomplishments. Her public television career, for example, as chief correspondent and principal substitute anchor for the PBS McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, which became NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Lehrer, by the way, another Kansan prolific writer. Her work as an international reporter, too. She gave us timely, insightful, globally important stories, often at some danger to herself and her crew, from Asia, South America, Africa, and the Middle East. Oh, and then there's her award-winning filmmaking on the AIDS crisis and on Guatemala and Chilean politics. Or there's her written journalism that has appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle, Foreign Policy, Mother Jones, The Nation, and other publications. Or her many honors, including being named Distinguished Kansan in 1995, her induction into the Topeka High School Hall of Fame in 1998, her honorary doctorate from Colby College in 2002, her honorary doctorate in Humane Letters from Washburn in 2020. But you may know all of that stuff. I'd like to introduce her instead as the person who once confessed, "My heart is in Kansas." Her recent writing has brought her to us and brought Kansas to her. A Train Through Time, A Life Real and Imagined, her 2018 memoir, brings together the personal, the loss of her mother when she was 9 years old, and the professional. And she covers disaster and mass death all over the world. That book is an exploration of childhood and of the adulthood that grew from it. Each stage of her growth afflicted by time and death and by the need to make sense of them. Last Light, the novel we are celebrating today, continues to show Elizabeth Farnsworth's engagement with Kansas and the world. Her main character, Isabel, shares with the author a sharp understanding of trauma, an innate goodness in trying to make a difference in the world, a capacity for sympathy and empathy, a vibrant curiosity, an appreciation for mental health treatment, and a bravery that is breathtaking. Even though I have come to know Elizabeth personally only recently, I find that we both attended the same youth group at First Congregational Church, and we remember that same associate pastor who spoke out for racial and social justice and against war. I grew up with her younger stepsisters attending Southwest, now Whitson Elementary, and Capper Junior High School. My wife, Jeffrey Ann Gowdy, and I live in Potwin, where Elizabeth visited her grandmother just 3 doors down from our house. We both have horses in our backgrounds, and we both love Wabaunsee County and the Flint Hills, and we both admire the photography of Terry Evans, whose work graces the cover of Last Light. Elizabeth Farnsworth has returned to Kansas for family and in her writing. She has brought us all together today, such a fine community of writers and librarians, family and book lovers. Elizabeth exemplifies how a place can shape a life and how a life can shape a place. We thank you for your continuing presence. Elizabeth Farnsworth.
Thank you for that. I'm really grateful to you for that. I am in my heart and soul a Topekan, and I'm very, very grateful to be here again with all of you. I want to start this by reading a poem. This is by Wendell Berry. The power of imagination is to know the timeless as it moves through time, the eternal presence that is both in and outside time and that comprehends the things we know and remember. My Kansas past never died in me. Timeless, it comprehends, I love that word, what I have known, and this book is at least partly a result of that. Tom, thank you so much for that. But this book wouldn't even exist if it weren't for Tom and his wife. of Jeffrey Gowdy, who introduced me to Thea Rademacher. Raise your hand. I'm going to ask people to raise their hands. Jeffrey, Thea is a publisher. She's the owner of Flint Hills Publishing. And if you ever want to have publishing be fun, you want Thea to be your publisher because she has a wonderful sense of humor and she doesn't get uptight and she's just great. And I also want to thank her friend Lynn Murphy, who's back there, who has come from Phoenix to help with doing all of this. It's a lot of work to put on readings and things like that. I want to thank the library. I want to thank Autumn Friedley and Haley Swisher. Where are you, Haley? There's Haley back there. Very young library person that took on this job of putting on this event. Thank you so much, Haley. I very well remember this library when it was on the Capitol grounds. How many people here remember when it was on the Capitol grounds? Yeah, because you're all my age, more or less. There are people here who can, well, one of them is Alicia, used to be Lang, who can remember the color of the frames of the windows on my playhouse when I was 9 or 10. I mean, those are the people you want to be with. I also want to thank, everybody at this library. I love the old library and love the new one too, so thank you all. I want to thank the smart, very hardworking staff at the Kansas Historical Society. Are any of you here? Nobody here. Well, oh, there you are. There you are. Good. Hi. This book wouldn't be credible without you all. And you found things for me. The book, at the end of the book, I do go into some detail on this. But they found things for me that just made my writing about what it was to be a POW here and how many were here. It was a piece of just genius to go and find that for me, so thank you. Kansas historian Virgil Dean is here. Raise your hand, Kansas. I've got Virgil with his wife Jan. And for years now, Virgil has been correcting anything I wrote about Kansas. Sometimes I was going west instead of east once, and he said, I don't think so, Elizabeth. And Jan, I would call and say, can I have green peppers growing in a garden when it's 100 degrees out? And Jan would say yes or no. Where are you, Jan? Raise your hand. So thank you. When I look out at you, I see at least 15, maybe 17 relatives, all of you that are related to me, including Sarah. So don't say anything bad about me to anybody in the room, because they're probably my cousin. I have all kinds of cousins, my goddaughter, and my niece, and my nieces, my grandnieces, and my grandnephew, and my husband who came all the way from Berkeley, and Barbie and Mary. Barbie came from Minnesota, and Mary came from Portland. And I know I'm going to leave people out, I might cry. Oh, Sarah, raise your hand, Sarah. Sarah's my best friend since birth, and we're related, even to her. I want to thank Melissa Masoner. Are you here, Melissa? I don't see you. I want to thank Melissa. There you are, who's done so much. Filmmaker Dave Kendall and Nancy Perry, who has supported Last Light in so many ways. Thank you. Last Light's a mystery story. It's the story of a young woman named Isabel Graham, who lives just a couple of houses down from where Tom and Jeffrey live. It was my grandmother and grandfather's house, a bunch of our grandmothers and grandfather's house. It was in Portland, and she was living there in the 1920s and 1930s. For reasons you'll discover if you read the book, she speaks German, pretty good German, although nobody really speaks good German, as any of you German speakers know, unless you're born there. And by the way, I do not speak German, so when I read the German words, I will read it the way I would read them in English. I had an interpreter work with me on all the German, and I'm not going to try to speak the words. Some of them are just too difficult. The Isabel, after she graduates from Wellesley, she grows up in Topeka, she goes to Wellesley, which my mother did, and graduated from Wellesley. She graduated in 1942, comes back to Topeka, and takes the job of interpreter for German-speaking prisoners of war at a U.S. Army hospital at the edge of Topeka in the Flint Hills. I've moved them. You do that in fiction. There are hints from the beginning of my story that she suffered a crisis when she was young, perhaps in Vienna, where she lived for a while. She doesn't want to remember it, but nonetheless, it will determine much of what happens in the book. Last Light was actually born one day. I was working at my desk in Topeka, and I look when I'm working at my computer at a bookshelf with books, and all of a sudden, a young woman on a horse I think she had a ponytail, and she rides up and she stops at a barbed wire fence, and on the other side is a man looking out from a small building, one-story building, through barred windows. And I thought, well, I think she's on the prairie somewhere. And I always wanted to write a novel. I submitted novels to 17 magazine when I was like 16, 15, 14. Nothing was ever accepted. But I never really had characters. So maybe I did research. I went to the wonderful Historical Society. I called Virgil. I talked to people about it. I called my cousin Jerry Fink, who's here. Where are you, Jerry? There you are. And because he actually went a lot to the Topeka U.S. Army Hospital, Winter General, because his dad was in the Army. And I did a lot of research, and I found out that thousands of prisoners of war, German, Italian, and other nationalities, were incarcerated in camps in our state during those years. As you all know, how many people know there were camps not far from here? And you know that the beautiful chapel in Camille was built by German stonemasons. My sister Marcia knew somebody in Salina who'd been a POW. And they were hired out, the ones in camps, not from hospitals, but in camps, they were hired out to bring in the crops. And some came back. The mysterious woman becomes the interpreter, and the man behind the bars and the windows becomes one of the prisoners of war. My own grandfather, Dr. William Merrill Mills, how many people were treated by Dr. Mills here? Jerry was. He was a surgeon here in Topeka. He had studied advanced surgical techniques in Vienna at the medical university there at the beginning of the last century. And so I decided that Isabel was going to learn her German in Vienna. And in 1934, which is when her father was studying advanced surgery there. And there was a short civil war at that time. The book moves back and forth between past and present. Isabel's first contact with prisoners of war occurs in the prologue. She's graduated from Wellesley with a major in German, and she's now living with her parents in Topeka, and funny thing, she's a reporter for the Topeka Daily Capital. Here's the first reading. This is at the very beginning of the book. It's the prologue. Early August 1943. Isabel stays in the shadow to avoid notice and wonders why the hospital train bypassed the Santa Fe station in East Topeka and stopped at a railroad crossing south of town. On the train are ill and wounded prisoners of war. Perhaps the Army thought they'd meet protests or worse, at the downtown station. The only light comes from inside the train and from lanterns carried by military police. It should be easy for Isabel to avoid notice. The Army has declared the train off limits to reporters, but her editor, disobeying the order, has sent her, the newspaper's only German-speaking reporter, to cover the first POWs to arrive for treatment at the new U.S. Army General Hospital west of town. When 4 ambulances arrive, soldiers from the hospital detachment grab litters and board Pullman cars. The transfer of the most seriously wounded or ill men is efficient. Within 15 minutes, the ambulances leave, no sirens, and head west on 21st Street. 4 city buses take their place. Ambulatory prisoners line up inside the cars of the train. Through windows, Isabel sees bandaged faces, arms in slings. MPs and orderlies rush to help injured men down the stairs. Steam and smoke billow from the huge engine. The scene is hellish, something out of Goya or Doré, Isabel thinks. The patients make their way in lantern light to buses. Neighbors in robes and pajamas have come out of houses to watch from front porches. Someone shouts, "They're Germans!" Several rocks are thrown, but no one is hit. MPs run to protect the prisoners, and drivers hurry to load buses. Isabel slips into a line of men waiting to board. One asks loudly in German, "Where are we?" "Kansas," Isabel says. This is the one thing I'm going to read. I'm so proud of myself. "Wo zum Teufel ist Kansas?" Where in the hell's Kansas? "In the center of the United States, a long way from the ocean." "Yes." "Verdammt, damn it, harder to escape." The line is moving quickly. She'll be ordered to leave any minute. She asks the man in front of her, "Where'd you come from?" "Tunisia, via Casablanca and a hospital on Staten Island." This is early in the war. The first prisoners were mostly coming from North Africa. "Where's your home?" "Regensburg," he answers proudly. Other prisoners also shout the names of their towns. Aachen, Lübeck, Heidelberg, Linz. Isabel notes that at least one prisoner is Austrian. Before slipping away, she asks another man, "What is your illness or injury?" "Hepatitis. Your people weren't prepared for the tens of thousands of us taken prisoner in Tunisia. The filth in those camps sickened and sometimes killed us." Thank you, Historical Society. Here in the conversation, an MP yells at Isabel to beat it. In the darkness, she runs to the newspaper's car, drives downtown to the office, and dictates her story to the night editor, who cuts out the references to Goya and Doré. It's late, and Isabel is tired, but before going home, she gets permission to spend the next day at the new hospital, reporting on the POWs. "I'll ride Joe," she tells her editor. "No German male can resist a good-looking horse." The POWs who arrived injured and ill in Topeka were in fact treated at U.S. Army hospitals, and these at the new U.S. Army hospital in Topeka, Winter General that it would have been in the novel. But in the novel, the prisoners are treated at a fictional Army hospital called Buffalo Ridge, just because the name was evocative. To create the hospital, I researched actual Army hospitals, but the hospital in Last Light is entirely fictional, and I want to make that clear because nothing, as far as I know, nothing bad happened at Winter General in the way it does at this hospital. Isabel does ride her horse Joe to the hospital, and I want to say now they're friends of my sister Marcia here, and my sister Marcia and my cousin down there, my best friend Sarah, are horse lovers, and Dick Riemann is here, the twin of Diane Riemann, who has died. But they all kept their horse at the same place in Topeka. They kept it at a pig farm just south of town. And so when I write about the horse and the farm and all of it, you will know that these are real people that are in my mind. And you know, the past, you all know the past doesn't die. It just lives in for you forever. And so this is very much influenced by them. She rides her horse to the hospital the next day. Her mother drives her to the pig farm south of Topeka where Joe, Isabel's horse, boards. And Isabel walks to the pasture, opens a rusted gate, and Joe comes running. He was 13 now. She'd had him since she was a kid. Sleek and strong with a reddish coat that glistened in the sun. Isabel led him back to the barn for saddling, mounted, and rode north along the creek toward town, and then west on a dirt road that took them across a limestone bridge over a creek coming out of the hills. On the bridge, Joe balked. He had never liked bridges. Isabel gently coaxed him to take the first step, coaxed him to take the first step, and after that he kept going, breaking into an unbidden trot when his hoofs hit dirt on the other side. Isabel guided him onto an old buffalo path that led into the hills. The familiar climb pleased him. He strained at the bit, and Isabel let him go at his own fast pace. The prairie hummed in the warmth of the August sun. A buck and doe watched from a grove of trees called red cedar in Kansas, but which Diane had discovered were actually Juniperus virginiana, a member of the juniper genus. A flock of orioles flew overhead. In a little less than 2 hours, they reached the hill. Called Buffalo Ridge, where the Army had built a general hospital for injured and ill American soldiers and POWs. Joe stopped at the barbed wire fence that surrounded the ground. Here's the image I saw at home. And Isabel looked across 150 acres, flattened by bulldozers, and mostly stripped of wild grasses and flowers. Before her was a cantonment-style hospital with 56 single-story wards, each with a red brick veneer set in long rows about 15 feet apart. She'd read in her newspaper that besides the wards, there were 2 adjoining surgery buildings, 4 mess halls, a laundry, gymnasium, movie theater, post office, gas station. Across the ground, she saw military police standing watch in a guardhouse at a wide gate. Isabel began to circle the hospital from behind the wire fence. According to the newspaper, the facilities at Buffalo Ridge would have covered 80 square blocks in town, and she figured the Army had chosen this site on the prairie, at least partly to save money. Through a window in a ward just inside the fence, she saw patients lying amidst the lifts and pulleys of traction. A covered walkway linked some of the buildings, making it easier for those in wheelchairs to get around. Army nurses walked in small groups along a street that circled the hospital grounds. A small detachment of soldiers marched in formation further along that street. She could hear them counting cadence. Skirting the fence, she urged Joe forward and noticed a physical therapy building, basketball court, baseball field. The hospital was a small town, almost complete in itself. The many buildings, though substantial, felt impermanent, as if they knew they didn't belong in that place and would vanish when the war ended. Continuing to circle outside the perimeter fence, she noticed a ward set apart from others, set and surrounded by double razor wire. 2 armed military policemen stood guard next to the only passageway through the wire. Spotting a nurse within shouting distance, Isabel called out, "Who's in that ward? I'm a reporter from the local paper. Are the POWs who arrived last night confined there?" The nurse looked where Isabel was pointing. "I've heard most of them left early this morning for clinics and camps around the state. Only the sickest and most injured POWs will be treated here." Pointing to a building about 40 yards away, she advised Isabel to seek more information at hospital headquarters. "We've been ordered not to talk about the POWs," the nurse says. Continuing toward the only gate onto the grounds, Isabel saw a barn and wondered what it might hold. A man watching from the barn door beckoned as she stood near. "Bring that handsome beast over here," he said, limping toward the fence. He wore a cowboy hat, plaid shirt, jeans, and on one foot, a well-tooled boot. On the other foot were bandages and a soft slipper. At the fence, he pulled gloves from a pocket to spread the barbed wire and then reached through to rub Joe's ears and face. What a beauty. I bet he won ribbons in shows. Was he a cow pony before you got him? Isabel nodded yes to both questions. The man was tall, too thin. She saw a scar coming down from under his hat along his cheek and neck. He also had scars on his left forearm. "I'm Lieutenant Billy Greenwood. Who are you?" he said. "Isabel Graham. My editor at the Daily Capital sent me to report on the prisoners who arrived last night. I'm on my way to headquarters." "Damn crowds," Billy Greenwood said. "I won't take them riding." "You've got horses in the barn?" "Yes, the docs here believe that horses are good for battle fatigue." He spit the words out with disdain. "That's what they call shell shock. I call it ruination. Battle breaks brains as well as bones, and some of us don't recover." Pointing toward the guardhouse at the entry gate to the hospital grounds, he told Isabel to meet him there. "I'll talk you past the MPs," he promised. With Billy's help, Isabel gets onto the hospital grounds and gets a tour, but she's not allowed to, then or ever, interview POWs for her newspaper. Nevertheless, when the commander hears she speaks German, he asks her to come back the next day to interpret for a prisoner who had arrived the night before. And she does that. She returns to the hospital the next day and walks from headquarters to the prison ward. It's the same building that I saw in my vision, with an MP, a military policeman, and Chief Nurse Margaret McGrath. Just inside the ward, Captain McGrath had left the MP outside. Captain McGrath explains to Isabel that one of the prisoners, a corporal named Ernst Bauer, was adamantly refusing surgery. He speaks only German and can't understand why an operation is necessary. He's too hurt and sick to be dangerous, but watch out for the big sergeant. He's a bully, or worse. A physician in scrubs and an orderly met them inside and led them through the building, which had separate quarters for enlisted prisoners and officers. Isabel saw 2 living rooms, 2 kitchens, a joint library, game room, 4 bunk rooms, 5 single bedrooms, and 3 bathrooms. The MP said that since no officers were then, were then under treatment in the prison ward, the 8 enlisted men were using the whole building. Only 2 were currently there. Others were undergoing medical procedures elsewhere at Buffalo Ridge. In a single bedroom, the recalcitrant patient, Corporal Bauer, sat in a simple wooden chair. Next to him on one side was a table, and on the other side a hospital bed. The table held a book with a title Isabel was too far away to read. Corporal Bauer struggled to hold himself upright in his chair. Layers of gauze encircled his head. A brace and sling obscured his self-arm. He tried to stand to receive the two women, and failing that, nodded deeply, almost a full bow, while seated. A large man lumbered heavily into the room and came so close behind Isabel she could smell him. Glancing back, she saw a boxer's flattened nose. An enforcer, she thought, not here to help, but to control. The chief nurse asked Isabel to introduce herself to the patient, and she quickly explained in German that she would serve as his interpreter. He asked in standard High German if she was professional. Isabel remembered from Otto. Otto's her tutor in Vienna, who you'll get to know well in the book. Isabel remembered from his lessons that among friends, German speakers might use a local dialect, but strangers often address each other in High German. The doctor interrupted what he was saying. Tell the patient that yesterday's x-ray revealed that his humerus isn't healing. The complex fracture was clumsily set. Pieces of bone endanger the radial nerve. If we don't operate to clean it up, he'll lose full use of that arm and hand. Isabel translated the doctor's words after explaining to him that she was a volunteer interpreter, not a professional. When she finished, the corporal said, Liebes Fräulein, I hear Vienna in your diction, all this in German. Tell the doctor the setting of my broken arm by a poorly trained medic at the prison camp in Tunisia was a nightmare. The pain since then has been severe, and I hesitate now to undergo surgery which would prolong my pain. Isabel noted that the patient had recognized her accent, which could but didn't necessarily mean she was Austrian, that he was Austrian. She translated, You're weak, the doctor's response. You're weak from dysentery. You've spent many weeks suffering severe pain. I understand your reluctance. Nevertheless, you must undergo surgery to avoid permanent damage to your radial nerve. It's my obligation to strongly urge that you do this. The pain from the operation will only last a few days. Without surgery, your pain will be chronic. Suddenly, the big man behind Isabel shoved her aside and spoke harshly to Bauer. Just do it, he said. Bauer responded, understood. Bauer tried again to stand up, but his knees buckled. The orderly eased him onto a litter. Eased him onto a litter. The MP took one end and the orderly the other. The large sergeant, determined to help carry the litter, started to shove the orderly aside, but the MP barked, Stay back, you may not leave the ward. Isabel and the head nurse followed the patient and carriers out of the ward and across the grounds to the surgery center, which had a separate wing for POWs. A nurse in the wing said Isabel didn't stay, but should return in 2 hours. Corporal Bauer disappeared into the operating rooms. As they left the surgery center, Chief Nurse McGrath told Isabel that Bauer had spoken only a few words since arriving at the hospital. Besides the broken humerus, he has infected scalp wounds and an amnesia from brain damage. What caused his wounds? From what I could understand, he doesn't remember. He clearly took a severe blow to the head and arm. He also got dysentery at the camp in Tunisia. The Allies never planned for taking so much prisoners. You saw how thin he is. What should I do if he wakes up? Translate for him. If he's in pain, tell the nurse. Be kind, but keep your distance. We are not allowed to fraternize with POWs. Soon Isabel has taken leave from her newspaper and is working full-time as chief interpreter for German-speaking prisoners at Buffalo Ridge. She moves into the nurses' quarters there. She gets trained as a nurse's aide. Joe comes to and joins the, I wouldn't use the words therapy horses, they would never have called them that then, but that's what they are. She will help many American soldiers as an aide, as well as the prisoners for whom she translates. She befriends several of the American soldiers, including a musician from Topeka, Jake Newman, who was like Billy Greenwood, wounded in North Africa, and who performs in the sunroom of the orthopedic ward most afternoons. On her second day of the hospital, Isabel hears music. Here's a reading about that. Outside headquarters, Isabel heard piano music and followed it to the sunroom of the orthopedic ward. Though she tried to enter quietly, the screen door slammed loudly behind her. Jake Newman, this is the person from Topeka that's the musician, didn't flinch at the noise. He sat askew on the bench, his wounded right leg sticking out to the side, pedaling only with his left foot. He was practicing scales on a handsome upright piano. They really did, the people from Topeka provided all these to Major General. That's where I get the idea, all these kinds of things. He was practicing scales on a handsome upright with a rich tone. Patients at tables around the room were playing games. Isabel noticed canasta, casino, and chess. They continually razzed each other, a way of keeping fear and sorrow at bay, she figured. She sat down in a chair between two of the tables. After running scales, Newman played chord inversions, stopping occasionally to leaf through charts like those used by Isabel's mother. You will have known by now that her mother's a musician too. Isabel had studied piano but never excelled. Jake Newman was short and trim. He wasn't handsome, Isabel thought, but he was sexy. When he looked up for a few seconds and noticed her, he raised an eyebrow and flashed a roguish smile. She blushed and to hide it picked up a newspaper. The Wehrmacht had recently failed in a major offensive around Kursk in Russia, giving the Red Army an important victory. The reporter quoted an analyst who claimed that the tide of war was turning. The possibility made Isabel dizzy with relief, and at the same time filled her with dread that it might not prove to be true. More patients and staff filed into the sunroom, which reminded her of a private club, plush rug, book-filled shelves, piles of newspapers and magazines. A woman with casts on her arm and foot entered on crutches. Mortar injuries occurred at a forward hospital in Tunisia. Isabel would later learn. A man sitting near the door gave his chair to a patient whose eyes were covered by bandages. The orderly who'd led him into the sunroom sat down nearby. A doctor in scrubs took place on the floor directly in front of Isabel. He looked so tired, she thought he might lie down and fall asleep at her feet. Several patients came into the sunroom from beds down the hall. A man on crutches who'd lost part of a leg below the knee, and two men in wheelchairs, their laps covered by blankets. Perhaps they'd lost both legs. She couldn't tell. Billy Greenwood, that's the horse guy, entered the sunroom and waved at Isabel but stayed back by the screen door. Isabel found him attractive but skittish, like an overgrown colt. She figured the nervousness was related to his brain injury. People kept arriving until there was nowhere to sit, even on the floor. Sunshine streaming through tall, south-facing windows lit Jake Newman like a theater spot. Without introduction, he began the concert with Paper Doll, a current hit, playing it sweetly like the Mills Brothers sang the song on the record. After that, Jake ran through an arrangement of music from Oklahoma and Pal Joey, and he spoke the lyrics from What is a Man? What is a man? Is he an animal? Is he a wolf? Is he a mouse? Is he the cheap or the dear kind? Is he the champagne or the beer kind? What makes me give? What makes me live? What is this thing called man? Newman scooted back on the piano bench and, rising awkwardly because of his bad leg, said, "No applause." He spoke almost in a whisper. The audience leaned forward to hear him. Private First Class Sloan arrived here 2 weeks ago. Wounded on an island half a world away. He died last night. I visited him before his death and felt what the poet, Walt Whitman, wrote many years ago. Oh, poor boy, I never knew you, yet I think I could not refuse this moment to die for you if it would save you. No one spoke. Newman played the first movement of Chopin's Sonata No. 2 in B-flat minor, the Funeral March, a piece Isabel had heard her mother perform. When he finished, he sat with his head lowered as people filed quietly out of the room. Though Isabel befriends Jake and she and Billy become good friends. She and Billy become really good friends. And other patients and staff. And Billy's by Council Road, from Council Road, by the way. Jake's from Topeka. Though Isabel befriends Jake and other patients and staff at the hospital, she is increasingly puzzled by the prisoner, Corporal Bauer. Here's a final reading about that. By the second week of September, the prison ward at Buffalo Ridge held 3 patients besides Corporal Ernst Bauer, the bully, Sergeant Hermann Schneider, and a private named Manfred Muller, both of whom had severe hepatitis, and also another private, Erhard Schmidt, who suffered from life-threatening malaria and spent most of the time in bed. Isabel seldom interpreted for these men because they spoke enough grade school level English to carry on simple conversations with doctors and nurses. One day she overheard Private Muller and Sergeant Schneider discussing in German the first national celebration of Adolf Hitler's birthday in 1939 when he turned 50. Schneider described marching in a glorious parade in Munich with fellow members of the, and this is the really hard thing to pronounce, so I'm just going to say the Nazi Party. Muller said he'd done the same thing in Ulm, his hometown. Because of his accent, Isabel was almost sure that Corporal Bauer was Austrian. When she asked him about it, Bauer claimed not to know. To Isabel, he seemed almost a different species from the other prisoners who came through the ward. Bauer was formal and polite with nurses and physicians who treated his injuries. He often said Isabel had saved his life by correctly interpreting the doctor's explanation of why surgery was necessary. One day, overhearing that praise, Sergeant Schneider yelled in German that Bauer was fraternizing with the enemy. Isabel reported the outburst to the hospital commander, who immediately called in Captain Brian Freeland, who led Buffalo Ridge's detachments of military police. Isabel repeated what she had told the commander and added, "Sergeant Schneider moves through the ward like a small tank, so I usually know right where he is. He'll run water in the kitchen, pretending to be washing dishes, but he's actually just outside the living room eavesdropping on Bauer and me." Freeland explained that Nazi prisoners of war had long-standing orders from party superiors to exert strong control over fellow POWs wherever they were. He'd heard about suicides and beatings in camps of prisoners who had been accused by hardliners of turning traitor. Freeland told Isabel to alert the guards outside the prison ward if she ever felt in danger. A fairy tale, the juniper tree. How many people here know the juniper tree? Anybody? If you go home and read it, you'll see it's the darkest. I think it's the darkest of the Grimm's tales. It runs through Last Light because Isabel's tutor in Vienna, a character you'll meet on page 1 of the book, used the tales of the Brothers Grimm to teach her the German language. The epigraph that begins my book is from, and it's apropos of fairy tales, is from Alice Hoffman's book, The Ice Queen. Every tale had a bloody lining. Every one had teeth and claws. I won't read any more because I don't want to give away the bloody lining and the teeth and claws that are the heart of the book. So, it's time for questions, and those of you who read the book, please be careful when you ask questions you don't reveal what's, you can see if you've read it that I've carefully not revealed a lot of the important things, so don't reveal them in your questions. Okay, time for questions. Anybody have a question? Yes, Jerry, my cousin Jerry.
How long have you been working on this book?
Oh, I didn't work on it constantly. I was doing other work too, but I came with Jenny. I went to Wellesley to begin research when I thought I was going to have her be a spy at that she would be trained at Wellesley. They came to a lot of the colleges and trained people to be spies and to be all these different things. And so I know that was 2017 because it was when Coulter was in school and we were going to go see him. He was at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. So since 2017, but not full-time, only really full-time for about a year or two, I'd say. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you get to choose the title for your book?
Yes, I named it Last Light right away, and if you haven't read it, right?
Not quite.
No.
I started it.
Well, at the beginning, her cousin Diane, who's based somewhat on Dick's sister Diane, Dick who's here, she's obsessed with light. And so they go up into the hills to watch the sunrise. And light is something we all know is very beautiful in the hills in Kansas. And so in Last Light, the light starts to become more and more important in the book. And I did get to choose it, yeah. Thea didn't make me change it, my mean publisher. No. Yes, Melissa. Oh, no, it's not Melissa. Sorry, hi.
Was there a particular audience you had in mind as you were writing?
I think most writers would say this. You can't think about the audience because nobody's going to like it. You just figure that's the case. There's not a single writer that is very confident about what they do, even though they might pretend to be. It's the nature of the artistic process, because you have a vision and you can never realize the vision that you have. So I didn't have a specific audience, but once I realized how deeply it was being affected by Kansas, I immediately knew that I wanted to begin here. I don't know if any of you heard Jesse Nathan read when he was here. He's a friend of mine who's a Kansan who read here recently, and he also said it was just a wonderful place to read books. So, in a way, you all are the audience I imagined. Yes, Joe. This is my nephew, my grandnephew.
You have a lot of experience in journalistic writing, in filmmaking.
I'll repeat the question, don't worry.
Other kind of creative endeavors, sorry. What was different about writing fiction in your experience compared to those?
That's a really good question, Joe. And to the extent the book is a failure, and all books are failures and successes in one way or another, it's because I'm a journalist. Some people that read it who liked it very much said, but I would know it was a journalist who wrote the book. And I'm not sure I can explain, I'm sure Tom or some of you who have PhDs in English and all could explain it to me, but there's a way you get inside of the mind if you're a great fiction writer, that I'm doing some reporting in here. I mean, I wouldn't have gone to the Historical Society if I didn't want to be as exact as I could. So yeah, I think it's really different. And I know that there are really great writers who have been journalists, but I wouldn't be one of them. Anybody else? Yes.
Have you started on another novel yet?
No, I don't think I'm going to do it. My husband has written many books, but I don't think I'm going to write another one. It's draining. And I kind of want to retire. I'll probably keep doing other things, and maybe I keep writing certain journalistic, doing certain journalistic, but I keep seeing her. Well, I can't tell you what happens at the end, but when you get to the end, what happens at the end will make you think there should be a follow-up. So maybe I will, but I don't think so. Yes?
Who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh gosh, well when you get the book, you'll see that it might be surprising to you, but the author that's most influential in the book, reading it, is Stefan Zweig. And Stefan Zweig was an Austrian author of the period when she was living in Vienna. And Stefan Zweig is a person who wrote a book about the period where he was Jewish, he lived in Germany, and he lived in Austria, he lived in Salzburg. And he wrote a wonderful book called Only Yesterday about the fact that nobody realized soon enough that it was coming and why that was so. It's a beautiful book. And he wrote many, many works of fiction. He was pretty much considered the greatest writer of his time at that period. And Stefan Zweig is a favorite writer, but I have so many favorite writers. It would be hard for me to name them all. I mean, Elizabeth Jabolska's here. She's a famous writer. Marcia, I'm sorry. That's right, your name might like my sister, not me. Marcia Jabolska's here. There's so many good writers that I could name. I mean, Tom and Jeffrey I read Tom all the time, and he's always in the Phi Beta Kappa Journal, and I read Jeffrey, and I have many, many. I mean, when I was asked this by Haley, I said my favorite characters were Stefan Zweig, because he's a character in his own book, and Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. So those you might be my favorite writer. Yes?
What was your process about unleashing your imagination and getting sort of untethered from your research? I mean,
The process of unleashing the imagination. I can imagine a whole lot of things pretty easily. It's a very powerful, not always to the best. You know, I'll imagine that Chuck's on a slippery road when he isn't, or something like that. I don't know. One of the things that being on television did help with this. You can't be afraid. Everybody here at some point has been terrified they'd fail. And we all fail all the time. It's just the nature of life. If not, we would be inhuman. But you can't be afraid you're going to fail on television. You have to just do it. You're on live television. It's not edited. If you make a mistake, you just can't be afraid about it. And I would say that along with the influence of Kansas, which is so strong in this book, I would say that having had to stick with something and go through with it and help me to stick with this, because I never dreamed I'd get a publisher. If I didn't have Thea, I wouldn't be here. And Thea's done a lot more than just publish the book. She's really been fantastic. Anything else? Yes, Marcia, not Elizabeth.
Yes, I know that you're going to be reading elsewhere in Kansas. Would you tell us in case we have friends or relatives in those other places?
Oh, thank you, spread the word. I'm going to Council Grove because my cousins here, Barbie and Mary, are the nieces of Nancy Cassabaum. And Nancy Cassabaum's daughter-in-law, Jennifer Cassabaum, has a beautiful bookstore in Council Grove. And I, of course, because I'm distantly related to Nancy too, in a way that we won't explain, but just because she's related to my first cousins, I'm more distantly related to her. And so I know Jennifer and I know Nancy, and Council Grove's beautiful, and I just thought, what the heck, let's go there. So we're all going there, all my gang that's here, we're going there tomorrow. And then this book I didn't talk about Marcia in, my sister Marcia, who many of you knew. But Marcia will be very much the subject of my introductory remarks when I read at a bookstore in Salina, Kansas on on Tuesday. And that's at noon. The Council Grove is at a brew pub, which is going to be so fun, that reading. And that's tomorrow at 5. Any other questions? Yes?
Did you outline the book before you started writing, or did you just start writing? And then if you did outline, did you write in the order that it appears in the book?
I did not. When I got the image, I knew she had to be able, when I got the image and I thought she'd be a spy. And I had got all these novels about the spies that the spying, POWs provided much of the best intelligence during the war. And the spies that interviewed them have written books about it, and one in particular I made use of it. It was a PhD, it was a master's thesis. And so once I realized that she wasn't going to be a spy, and he was going to be the person that she's looking at through the windows, a POW, then I did a lot of research. But because she wasn't going to be a spy, I still wanted to get Vienna into this, and I can't explain why. She had to be somewhat damaged. When you read the book, you'll see that this has to be a person with a background for the book to work the way I hope it works. So then I decided that she would have had this background. So you'll see that the prologue is set, the first chapter is set in Vienna, the prologue. First part of the prologue, and then the second part of the prologue is the arrival of the POWs on the train. And then I was off and running, and then there's a lot about the prairie, and they ride their horses on the prairie. And so then that led me certain directions, and then I had to describe the hospital. But I never sat down ever and wrote it and outlined it. And in the research, I would learn something in the research, then I'd have to change something too. I kept learning in research. So that's the way I did it. Little by little by little. I have to tell you that if we were in Berkeley right now, where Chuck and I live, I would be thanking many, many people. I have many writer friends, and a lot of them read it. And then they gave me notes, and I changed a lot of it because of what they said. Not anything crucial, but reordering something, for example. Yes?
I wondered, I started out wondering how you chose Thea for your publisher, and then I thought, how many different people and how did you find them? Obviously, there are a number of people involved in this whole process. How did you find these?
Elizabeth, that's my dad.
I bet you I asked her, I said, I didn't know she was so pretty. Did you know she was pretty?
Well, I knew it from the beginning.
Oh.
I blush.
Well, I found Thea because Tom and Jeffrey introduced me to her. Tom's the first person that said to me, I think Thea'd be a good person for you. And then I actually called some other publishers around just to talk to them. And another publisher, the one that's in Emporia, it also recommended Thea. And I had talked to various publishers, but this was my best and favorite person that I could deal with and be with. And publishing is not always fun. I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard for them because she has to provide everything. She's an independent publisher. She's not a big fancy publisher. She's a fancy independent publisher. And she did so much of the work. And do you know that right now, there are a few typos and things. Every book's got them. And we did the best we could, but there are some mistakes. In the book, the ones you're getting, on the back, the very last page is my bio. And it says that my husband and I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Well, we have 2 children. And on the flyleaf of the hardback book, it says we have 2 children. So Chuck and I are saying that our beloved golden retriever, Leo, who died 2 years, did that from the grave. But anyway, so I have so many friends here, and writer friends too. And they got me places. But like, if you wonder how I found the research, aside from the research that I got at the Historical Society, I just Googled, I think I Googled spying on POWs, and Captain Stephen Kleinman, Navy Captain Stephen Kleinman, had written a whole thesis about it, which was then published as a pamphlet. In the back of the book, I have the place you can get it. And it was fascinating what they did. They had a whole secret place outside Washington, D.C. And they brought the highest level POWs to London and treated them very, very well. These are the generals and such. And then they brought a whole lot of the ones that had been put on the boats in North Africa or elsewhere and brought here. England was getting most of them at first, but they got too many. And so then they started bringing them here. And they put a lot of them in the Midwest. We had how many? We had 8 to 10 camps, something more than that, 16 camps and sub-camps. And Virgil and I, my historian mentor back there, tried to figure out exactly how many POWs came through here. And we can't find a figure that we trust. But the figure that I can trust was from the Historical Society, that Winter General treated 1,000 POWs. So that's a lot of people. And this is something not many people know. So I think that was partly new. But you know, one person leads you to another, and I was led to him by somebody that a wonderful Topeka writer, Kansas City writer, lives outside Kansas City or outside Lawrence, H.C. Palmer, I highly recommend his work. He's a poet and a wonderful writer. He was a surgeon in Vietnam, writes a lot about Vietnam. But he introduced me to people, just people that I would call introduced me to people that knew about these matters. Thank you. Yes?
Were there any surprising details that you uncovered that changed the course of what you were writing?
Yes. I mean, the number of POWs was really shocking to me. And then the part, I've read some World War I history, World War II history, and I was a history major, but I knew nothing about once they finally won in Tunisia. They had, again, I do have the numbers of this, but I don't remember it right now. We're talking tens of thousands of prisoners. And they had nowhere to put them. There are quotes from one of the major generals, I forget which one it was, that says we can't do this. We can't keep them. There's no latrines. We've got to do something. And so I didn't know that had happened in Tunisia. I didn't know how many prisoners there were. I did read about the battles. I read about how people might have been injured and in ways that I could use here. I can't say too much about this because you learn more later. I read about the air battles and the other battles to the extent I could. And that's about it. Did I answer your question? Oh, good, good. Anything else? Anybody else? Yes, yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Barbie,
Oh,
this is my cousin.
After being
Barbie's a librarian.
After being a Winter General and then on farms and doing things in the community, what else happened? happened to these prisoners?
Oh, at the end of the book, you will learn about that a little bit. They didn't stay long in the Army hospitals, because the main thing about the Army hospitals is they were desperately overworked, because all the doctors were being used elsewhere. And it was really hard work. I mean, they were fantastic what they were doing. She's working 15 hours a day. And I did read about that at the Historical Society. There was a lot of good coverage in the Topeka, in the Journal and in the Capitol about, they weren't allowed to interview POWs as far as I could see, but they interviewed a lot of soldiers there. What was the question?
The hospital and then out in the...
Oh, then where'd they go? Then as soon as the war ended, they almost, I don't suppose there were a whole lot of injured soldiers at the end at the hospitals, but I don't know. You all know that Senator Dole was in Winter General forever as an injured soldier. He was there a long time. But the prisoners in the camps were sent east, and then they were sent back home as soon as they could be sent back home. All those guys, they all went home. And I don't think there were many, I didn't read about POW women. Did you, Virgil? No. Yes, my goddaughter, my niece.
Didn't some of the prisoners of war come back though, because they loved Kansas?
Yes, and do you know the name of the person in Salina that did that, that was your parents' friend? Yeah, Marcia told me about him. He came back, she really liked him. Lots of people liked it. Lots of people thought, I mean, many people had to fight in the war for Germany that didn't like Hitler. And so lots of people were very happy to be here, very. There is something in my book I should mention about the segregation of Army hospitals. There were prisoners that were treated, but no black people. And I do mention it because Isabel's parents are members of they were, as were my grandparents, my ancestors, abolitionists that came to Kansas as abolitionists. And they were working to end the segregation of hospitals. But no, the black soldiers weren't treated. And I even called the historical place that is all about Army hospitals during World War II, and he said no. I think a few, it did happen occasionally, but almost never. The black soldiers had their own hospitals in the South. One hospital, I think, in the South. Yes?
How did you come to live in Berkeley?
Oh, well, my husband Chuck, I forgot to say this, also he didn't go to Southwest, poor thing, he went to Randolph. But then he went to Topeka High, and then he went to KU. We are both, he's a diplomat child, but he ended up in Topeka. And we met, even though I had known his brother well in Topeka. His brother, who here knew Robert Farnsworth? Probably a lot of people, yeah. Well, I knew him well in Topeka because we're the same age, and Chuck is a teeny bit older than I am. I never knew Chuck. He knew Marcia, my sister. They played together as kids. And they were terrible together because they always teased each other all the time when we were even grown-ups. So then I married Chuck. I met him at Stanford at a party, and we got married 10 months after we met. And then Chuck had a Ford Foundation grant to study in Peru, and I'd gotten my master's degree in Latin American history. So we went to live in Peru, and then we came back up and he worked at UCLA for a professor, and then he worked for the United Farm Workers, and working to get wages up for farm workers in California. And then we ended up living, we lived in Delano in the Central Valley. We lived in El Centro in the Imperial Valley. And then we ended up, he had a law firm in Oakland. And we could have lived in Oakland. And it was a really nice law firm in Oakland, but we're on the very edge. Berkeley runs into Oakland. We might as well be in Oakland, but we're in South Berkeley. It has fabulous bus service. It's a wonderful place to live if you're older, and for children too. Our children could get around anywhere they wanted. They could be out anytime. Incredibly safe, wonderful place to live. Great schools. Anybody else? Okay, well, probably everybody has other things to do. Thank you very, very much.
have the book for sale at the table here, and then Elizabeth's also going to be autographing the book as well. Thank you.